The humid air of Singapore in early December 1941 did not smell of impending doom. It smelled of colonial routine, of gin and tonics at the Raffles Hotel, and of an unshakable belief in the permanence of the British Empire. For decades, the Singapore strategy had been the cornerstone of imperial defense in the Far East. It was built on a single, seductive premise that a massive naval base, defended by heavy coastal batteries, could hold out until a grand relief fleet arrived from Europe. But as the shadows of the Second World War lengthened, that premise began to rot from within. The arrival of Force Z on December 2 was supposed to be the ultimate deterrent. When the brand-new battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the veteran battlecruiser HMS Repulse steamed into the Johor Strait, they were greeted as saviors. The Prince of Wales was a titan of modern engineering, a King George V-class monster that had recently survived a duel with the Bismarck. The Repulse, though older, was a graceful greyhound of the sea, beloved by its crew. Together, they represented the pinnacle of British prestige. Yet, they were a fleet without a shadow, lacking the one thing that would decide the coming conflict: air cover. History is often written in the ink of missed opportunities and bureaucratic inertia. The original plan had called for a third vessel to join the task force, the aircraft carrier HMS Indomitable. But in a twist of fate that would haunt Winston Churchill for years, the Indomitable had run aground during training in the Caribbean. Rather than waiting for a replacement or reassessing the risk, the Admiralty pushed forward. They relied on the outdated doctrine that capital ships, if well handled and heavily armed, could defend themselves against any threat from the sky. It was a systemic failure of imagination that would prove fatal. At the heart of this tragedy stood Admiral Sir Tom Phillips. Known as Tom Thumb due to his short stature, Phillips was a brilliant staff officer but a man deeply wedded to the traditions of the Great War. He was a vocal skeptic of the airplane and Apo's ability to sink a maneuvering battleship. To Phillips, the sky was a nuisance, not a graveyard. He believed that the vastness of the ocean and the speed of his ships would shield them from the Japanese 22nd Air Flotilla. He did not realize that he was not just sailing into a monsoon, but into a paradigm shift that would render his entire world obsolete. When the news broke on December 8 that Japanese forces were landing at Kota Bharu and Singapore, the atmosphere in Singapore shifted from complacency to frantic energy. Phillips knew that his fleet in being was useless if it remained at anchor. He made the bold, arguably desperate decision to lead Force Z north to intercept the invasion convoys. He did so with a haunting silence, refusing to request dedicated air support from the Royal Air Force, fearing that radio transmissions would give away his position. He gambled everything on the element of surprise and the thick tropical rain clouds of the South China Sea. But the Japanese were not blind. They had spent years perfecting the art of long-range aerial torpedo attacks, a discipline the British Admiralty largely dismissed as a niche capability. While Phillips searched for the Japanese transports, a Japanese submarine, the IR-65, spotted the British wakes cutting through the dark water. The hunter had become the hunted. Throughout the night of December 9, Japanese scout planes and submarines tracked Force Z like wolves trailing a wounded stag. The British were unaware that the very clouds they relied on for cover were failing them, parting just enough for the Japanese eyes to see the white foam of their passage. As the sun rose on December 10, the tactical situation turned from precarious to catastrophic. Phillips, having found no sign of the invasion fleet and fearing he had been spotted, turned back towards Singapore. He received a report of a Japanese landing at Kuantan, much further south. It was a ghost report, a false alarm that drew Force Z even closer to the Japanese air bases in occupied Indochina. At 11 a.m., the radar screens on the Prince of Wales began to flicker with the ghosts of incoming destruction. The first wave of Japanese G3M and Nell and bombers was not just a raid, it was a funeral procession for the age of sail. The first attack targeted the Repulse. High-level bombers dropped their payloads from 10,000 feet, scoring a single hit that crashed through the hangar deck but failed to disable the ship. The crew of the Repulse, led by the charismatic Captain William Tennant, fought back with a ferocity that momentarily stalled the Japanese momentum. But the Japanese were disciplined. They did not rely on high-altitude bombing alone. They were waiting for the torpedo bombers. The G4M and Betty and bombers soon appeared on the horizon, flying low, hugging the waves in a deadly, rhythmic approach that bypassed the British long-range anti-aircraft fire. The Prince of Wales was the primary target for the first wave of torpedoes. Unlike the Repulse, which was steered with the agility of a destroyer by Tennant, the Prince of Wales felt the weight of its own armor. One torpedo, a masterpiece of Japanese engineering, struck the port side aft. It did more than just blow a hole in the hull, it struck the very nerve center of the ship. The explosion bent the outer propeller shaft, which, still spinning at high speed, tore through the internal bulkheads. Water began to roar into the engine rooms and the electrical generators failed. The modern marvel of the Royal Navy was suddenly a drifting, powerless giant, its steering jammed, its great guns unable to train on the swarming attackers. In the midst of this mechanical collapse, the human element took over. Below decks, engineers worked in rising, oily water, illuminated only by the dim glow of emergency lanterns. They were the unsung heroes of Force Z, men who knew the ship was dying but stayed at their posts to keep the pumps running for just a few more minutes. On the decks, the gunners of the 5.25-inch dual-purpose batteries found themselves betrayed by their own equipment. The heat and humidity of the tropics had caused the complex electrical relays of the guns to fail. They were forced to fire manually at targets moving too fast for human eyes to track. The Repulse, seeing its sister ship in agony, closed the gap to offer assistance. Captain Tennant managed to avoid 19 torpedoes through sheer brilliance of seamanship, a feat that remains legendary in naval history. But the sheer volume of the Japanese attack was overwhelming. A second wave of torpedo bombers focused their efforts on the Repulse, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. The anvil attack was a geometric certainty of death. No matter which way Tennant turned, a torpedo was waiting. At 12:23 p.m., the Repulse was struck by 4 torpedoes in rapid succession. The ship that had survived the battles of the First World War could not survive the technology of the Second. The Repulse did not linger. It listed heavily to port, stayed poised for a few agonizing moments, and then rolled over. Captain Tennant gave the order to abandon ship, and many of the crew managed to scramble into the sea before the great hull disappeared. Meanwhile, the Prince of Wales was in its death throes. A final wave of high-level bombers scored hits on the deck, turning the once pristine ship into a charnel house of twisted steel and fire. Admiral Phillips and Captain Leach remained on the bridge, choosing to go down with the ship in a final, somber adherence to a code of honor that the modern world was rapidly discarding. At 1:18 p.m., the Prince of Wales vanished beneath the waves. The silence that followed was broken only by the cries of survivors and the distant hum of the departing Japanese aircraft. The Japanese pilots, in a rare moment of chivalrous recognition, flew over the site of the sinking and dropped wreaths into the water, acknowledging the bravery of the men they had just sent to the bottom. Out of nearly 3,000 men, over 800 were lost. The impregnable fortress of Singapore was now an island without a shield, its northern gate wide open to the advancing Japanese army. The news reached London in the middle of the night. Churchill would later write that in all of the war, he never received a more direct shock. The fall of Force Z was not just a tactical defeat, it was the psychological collapse of the British Empire in Asia. It proved that the battleship, the ultimate symbol of national power for 4 centuries, was now a vulnerable relic in the face of air power. The systemic failures, the lack of air cover, the reliance on faulty intelligence, and the dismissal of Japanese technical prowess had converged into a singular, tragic moment of clarity. The historical irony is profound. The Prince of Wales had been instrumental in the Atlantic, a symbol of British defiance against the Nazis. Yet, in the Pacific, it became a symbol of British obsolescence. The disaster at Kuantan forced every navy in the world to rewrite their manuals of war. It signaled the end of the battleship era and the dawn of the aircraft carrier as the new king of the seas. The sacrifice of the men of Force Z was the final, bloody payment for a lesson that the world's admirals had been too slow to learn on their own. Today, the wrecks of the Prince of Wales and the Repulse lie in the murky depths of the South China Sea, designated as war graves. They are silent monuments to a day when the horizon changed forever. They remind us that even the most formidable armor cannot protect against the forward march of time and technology. In the cold, dark waters, the great guns are silent, but the story of their fall remains a haunting echo of hubris, courage, and the brutal reality of a world in transition. As the sun sets over the Malayan coast, the tragedy of Force Z stands as a testament to the fragility of empires. It is a story of men who fought with the tools of the past against the weapons of the future. It is a reminder that in the theatre of war, the most dangerous enemy is not the one on the horizon, but the refusal to see that the world has already changed. The ghosts of the Prince of Wales and the Repulse still drift in the currents, forever caught in the moment when the old world died and the new one was born in fire and salt.